The most fun part of the draft, year in, year out, is typically looking back and seeing who are the guys not in the first round that became starters, that became even superstars, that were taken late day two in day three. So much of the conversation is talking about the top 10 prospects who are going to be the first rounders, but a lot of the conversation typically isn't oriented towards who are the better guys in the later rounds of the draft. So today, I decided we're going to go over the top 20 prospects in the draft that will not be first rounders in the upcoming 2026 NFL draft. Some guys that had unbelievable college careers, but for whatever reason, they weren't freak athletes. They weren't 6'4", 245 pounds running a 4.4 40, but they still produced at a really high level. They were excellent football players, and they still have a really good chance to be stars at the NFL level. If you're new here to Blitz with Blender, thank you so much for watching. Hope you subscribe, like, comment down below what you think of this topic. Always love reading through what you guys have to share, and I hope that you enjoy. We're going to start this off with arguably the best defensive player in college football this past season, the Nagurski, the Bednarik, the Butkus Award winner, Jacob Rodriguez. Now, he ran a 4.61 in the 40-yard dash. He tested exceptionally well, forced 11 forced fumbles the last couple of seasons, 7 in 2025, 255 total tackles, 21 and a half tackles for loss. I mean, I'm getting out of breath. You're even listing this stuff. 6 sacks, 5 interceptions over the course of the last couple of years. And he's cerebral. He played quarterback at Virginia in high school. Very smart player. It's just that because he's 6'1", he is a guy that runs a 4.6 instead of a 4.45. He's not as enticing to NFL teams, but a player that could wind up being just as good as all of them because he has traits being smart, being highly athletic, and then producing on the football field. Rodriguez likely goes in the third round of the draft, late day two, and somebody is getting a heck of a playmaker and one of the best high character players in the game. His girlfriend is a helicopter pilot, and it's just been such a fun story following Jacob Rodriguez the last season, specifically for Texas Tech, on their route to being a first-round bye kind of team and being the heart and soul of that program. We're not going to go as long talking about each of these players, but you have to start it off with Jacob Rodriguez. Now, outside of him, there's not really any particular order. Like, these are specifically the top guys. I just think that these are standouts of this list of 20 guys that will be glanced over. Not necessarily these are all the top of the second round or third, but players that without a doubt have a great shot to be players at the next level. It just will not be first rounders. I guarantee it. Number 2, we're going to go Chris McClellan out of Mizzou. 8 tackles for loss, 6 sacks, 4 batted passes in 2025. A really athletic defensive tackle. Played with Damon Wilson and Zion Young. Arguably the second best defensive line in the SEC behind A&M's really strong units. You can look at games like Alabama where they were a wrecking crew. He's 6'3", 315 pounds, everything you like in a D tackle. He's got pretty good feet for his size. An anchor of arguably the best defensive line, once again, I think in college football, that did not make the CFP and what the Mizzou Tigers were. And a player like him, it's always fun to look at guys that weren't first rounders, that don't have the most unbelievable traits, that still produced, and they can really step up and have that dog in them still when you select him. Another one of those guys that's a thoroughbred, a Wardaddy. That's the main way that I describe him. The last 3 seasons, 22 and a half tackles for loss, 19 sacks. That's Derrick Moore for the Michigan Wolverines. Overlooked at times by the Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant conversation, but he had a teammate last year in Josiah Stewart get picked by the Rams. A decent enough player. I think Derrick Moore goes a little bit higher than Stewart did. Look, 90 tackles and a 4-year player the last couple of seasons. He's edgy. He likes to talk. likes to run his mouth a little bit, hits you a little bit after the whistle. There's piss and vinegar to this guy. Now, you don't quite like that he head-butted an official in this year's The Game, Ohio State versus Michigan. Amazingly did not get tossed out of it, but a kind of guy that's got a fire to him. He's very athletic, 6'3", 254 pounds. He's a perfect frame for a 3-4 outside linebacker, a guy that's got responsibilities to rush the passer on third down. There's a lot of teams that are going to really seek to bring Derrick Moore onto their roster. At number 4, let's go offensive line, the nitty-gritty of this thing for Florida. A center position for the National Football League just doesn't hold that much value. How about an All-American, though, in Slaughter? 6'4", 300 pounds, so he's got that frame. He's a really good pass protector, only 1 sack allowed in 800 snaps. And if you look at value of certain position, like if you stacked it up, this is probably the best center in this draft. He's easily in the top 2 or 3 of this conversation. I've got another interior line guy in here later on that you're going to have to wait to hear about. But this is going to be a good player at the next level. There's certain tackles that you take just because of the value at the position. But these interior guys, specifically center, that were All-Americans and played in the Southeast Conference or the Big Ten, you're about 95% sure they're going to be really good players, and there's just not quite the drop-off, potentially the pressure and the need of development that happens with your tackles. Even on the other side, the position of edge defender taken in the first round, there's such an immediate putting on, can you get to 10 tackles for loss? Can you get to the quarterback 7 or 8 times as a rookie? Those interior guys, a little bit of the weight lifted off, and they can go be themselves. At number 5, Tyrion York, a 3-year starter who didn't miss a game, 230 total tackles, 7 passes defended, 25.5 tackles for loss, and 6.5 sacks. He's 5'10" and is 232 pounds. So that drops him out of the conversation without a doubt to be a first, likely a second round pick. He's going to drop to probably that 3rd or that 4th round. It depends on the linebackers and how many wind up getting taken. I think because of that level of production, how he produced, it may be a late 2nd round kind of guy here, but because of wide receiver specifically and the amount of defensive line players, I think that line gets moved a little bit to where York gets pushed. Just one of those guys for A&M that was just a cyborg, just would not miss tackles, could rush the quarterback, exactly what you want in a leader, a culture builder for a next program. That 5'10" sort of edge to him, it sort of fires you up to see a guy like that and look to prove something at the next level. Deni Dennis Sutton, this was a player that I had as potentially a top 5 player in college football for this past season. 6'5", 270 pounds, and because Penn State went from a team that was in the semifinal to a team that lost a bunch of games, head coach fired, starting quarterback is done for the season in October, people forgot about this guy. And whoever winds up drafting him is getting somebody with elite traits. And he, in my opinion, if he'd fallen out of the top 15 selections before the season, I'd have been shocked. I'd have been amazed what happened. And you wind up seeing how it played out. He missed no games out of 55. I'll say that again. 55 games he played in college, did not miss any of them. 34.5 tackles for loss, 24 sacks, 8 passes defended, and 7 forced fumbles. He was on the opposite side of a guy like Abdul Carter. You can really add a lot of depth in a Deni Dennis Sutton, potentially a starter as a 4-3 defensive end at 6'5", 270 in the way that he moves, and he's athletic in those Penn State players. There's a lot of value there for a selection for him. It will not be in the first round. Somebody's getting a heck of a player in Deni Dennis Sutton. At number 7, you might not have expected a quarterback, but I'm going to go with Cade Klubnik out of Clemson. I just remember, again, with these 2 guys that I'm bringing up here, in what I evaluated from them, and what I spoke about, their ability. Like Cade Klubnik, he was my number 1 quarterback for this past season. I'm just going to, not have him as a draftable grade, not put him as somebody that's worthy of potentially being a guy that gets a shot at the next level. I saw too much from him in the biggest game of his season, the first round of the CFP against Texas, throwing 4 touchdown passes against one of the best defenses in college football. And so I think that Cade Klubnik is a guy that deserves some attention. Obviously won't be a first round, likely isn't even a second or a third round pick, but still with experience, 3-year starter under his belt. Just 6'1", 205 pounds. That is a little bit of a negative, a little bit. It's a big negative for teams. It doesn't have the biggest arm, and he doesn't run a 4.4, but 36 touchdowns to 6 picks. That drops down to 16-6, still 900 rushing yards and 17 touchdowns. The mobility is there in his career at Clemson. Dabo Swinney might not be a top 10 coach in the country anymore in a lot of people's minds. I still think there's a lot of value there in learning from someone like that and that toughness. Don't write off Cade Klubnik for what his career potentially could be. Likely figures to be a guy that gets a shot as a backup at some point that can step in and potentially turn the career arc around. I just find that a little bit fascinating. You look at a guy like him and Klubnik or Drew Aller, guys that could have been top 5 picks, an organization that they're headed up on, and then they come back for that season in 2025 and they just don't play well, and it depletes their draft stock, and probably they lose out on around $30 million unless they wind up signing a contract later on in their career. Maybe my favorite guy on this list. It's tough with guys like Jacob Rodriguez and a couple of these guys later on here, but Gabe Akis. 4 years, 50 games of experience, 35.5 tackles for loss, 27 sacks. Those are the last 2 years. Say it again. 35.5 tackles for loss, 27 sacks in his career. The last 2 seasons, 26.5 tackles for loss and 19 sacks. 6 forced fumbles the last 2 years. He's a complete player. At the combine, 6'4", 260, traitsy, handsy. He's violent, and he played in the Big Ten against some of the best offensive linemen, and you now see the immediate shift. When he came in as a freshman player, the level in that conference, nowhere near where it is now. The Oregons, the USCs, obviously Ohio State getting better now. All these programs getting better, not just at the offensive line elsewhere, but specifically for him in chasing down these new levels of running backs. We talked about some of them. The Quinshawn Judkins, the Travion Hendersons of the world, and having to play against Emmett Johnson and Allen and Singleton, a lot of the best backs in the country come out of the Big Ten and best O-linemen, and Akis played incredibly well against them. This is a guy that if you can take him after pick 50, you are getting maybe the steal of the draft, the guy that produced. He's got traits, he's got it all. It's just a matter of who's going to take him and where. At number 9, pick 6 against the Buckeyes in the quarterfinal, Keontae Scott beat J.J. Smith to his block. He's 6 foot, 195 pounds. He's got good size. Transferred to Miami after a couple of years, 2 years at Auburn. A lot of experience. 179 tackles, 13 tackles for loss, 5 sacks. He had a ability to him that really made you think that, like, this guy's so versatile. Corner, on the inside, outside safety, and moving him around. One of those guys that can move around the line of scrimmage that figures to immediately put in impact. I sort of look at a player in recent memory in Xavier Watts, who fell to the very end of the 3rd round in the 2024 NFL draft. Bam! He put up 5 interceptions on the season, an immediate turnover machine. Scott wasn't to that level. 2 picks and both for touchdowns, 2 forced fumbles this past season, but still a guy that took the football away, played well in the biggest of moments, and certainly is an enticing option for somebody that's going to need a defensive back in late day 2 or even day 3 if he falls that far. that far, excuse me. At number 10, about halfway through this list, there was a game week 1 that shocked a lot of us if you're a college football fan. And this kid for Alabama was maybe the only bright spot. Parker Brailsford, 6'2", 290 pounds. Ideally, he gets up to 308, 310. He was a captain for Alabama. Started 27 of 28 games. He just missed one game. In 2023, he played at Washington for the Huskies. And he played a little bit of right guard there. He moved around that offensive line. And he was a first-team All-American. So Parker Brailsford played for a great offensive line, protecting Michael Penix Jr., and the Washington Huskies go to the national championship game, transfers to Alabama, and plays very well there, fills in as a captain, and he is one of those players like Jake Slaughter, another guy also on this list. It's just very tough to leave him off of it. Some of those interior guys that played so well, captain type levels, lots of leadership traits. Whoever picks them is getting an excellent football player that immediately makes your team smarter and makes your culture better. At number 11, Jadarian Price. He is the only player really on this list that gives me an ounce of doubt that he could potentially go round 1. I still think that it's a 99% chance that he doesn't, just because of the value at other positions. He's an electric runner, and he was a returner in college football for Notre Dame. The best number 2 running back in recent memory in the sport. 1,400 rush yards, 18 touchdowns combined the last 2 seasons. And that's with Jeremiah Love, the best back in college football, playing with him. Love had 2,500 yards and 35 touchdowns of production he took from J.D. Price. So what does that mean, folks? It means that Price wasn't ground into a pile of dust. He still got a lot of juice left in those legs because he wasn't having to carry the football 350 times a year. And there's a lot of value in that. A guy that's still got a ton of juice, Jadarian Price, you would really like a little bit more value in a sense of catching the ball out of the backfield. But still, overall, this is a player that I don't think is going to be escaping that second round. At number 12, D'Angelo Pons. At times, and what he puts out there on the field, it screams best cornerback in the draft. A pick 6, the first play of the semifinal against Oregon, he dropped the mic. That was the end of that game, and they blew out the Ducks. 170 tackles, 11 tackles for loss, 7 picks, 33 passes defended in just one missed game the last 3 years. Maybe he's 5'9.5" and 175 pounds and needs to add weight. But at the combine, he looked pretty dang fluid. The ball skills jump out at you. And his vertical jump that he put up, 43.5. Are you kidding me? So maybe he's 5'9.5", but he plays like he's 6'4" with that athleticism and the way that he's able to move. That's somebody that is one of those players that you have to keep an eye on no matter where his name goes in this draft process, who took him, and keep your eye on what winds up happening with D'Angelo Pons. At number 13, out of Louisville, Chris Bell. Go watch the Miami game and get back to me if you haven't heard about Chris Bell. If you do know about the name, but you think, this is a guy that I don't know about. Is he one of the best 5 or 6 wide receivers in this class? 1,600 yards and 10 touchdowns the last 2 years. So not ridiculous production. But against the 4 toughest opponents this year, he had his best 4 games. Against JMU, CFP team, one of the best defenses in college football, 85 yards and a touchdown. Against Pitt, 10 catches, 135 yards and a touchdown. Pitt had a good defense. Guys like Kyle Lewis on that unit. Virginia, runner-up to the ACC, 12 catches, 170 yards, and 2 touchdowns. And then there's his game against Miami, the Hurricanes, the runner-up to the national title. The man had 9 catches, 135 yards, and 2 touchdowns, torching the Hurricanes. If you remember that game, it was Friday night under the lights, and this man put on a show. Chris Bell is built. My comp for him is A.J. Brown. Maybe not that level of physicality, of explosiveness, but you watch him and you see him move. If you put him in an Eagles uniform at times, you'd be like, yeah, sure, that's A.J. Brown. That's the comp for me for him. Maybe the ceiling isn't as high, but he's going to be one of those players that you sort of follow and you watch. Could he be a number 2 wide receiver immediately for an organization in the way that he played in the biggest of moments against some pretty dang good defenses? It gives you a lot of confidence. Sure hands, run after the catch ability, violent with his hands at the point of attack so that he can catch contested catches. A really excellent player in him. At number 14, here's another lineman. We're going to keep those coming here. Logan Jones out of Iowa, a 4-year player, experience as a basketball player in high school, defensive end in high school as well, with 22 tackles for loss and 8 sacks. So he goes over to the offensive side of the ball. He won 2 state titles in shot put, discus. So he was such a versatile athlete with Iowa that you sort of forget at times how good these guys were in high school. That maybe they're 300 pounds. You don't realize that if they just drop 50 pounds and they get on a certain workout regimen, they could be basketball players, that they have that level of lateral quickness, that toughness, that bounce to them. Logan Jones is one of those, won the Remington Award. He's 6'3", 300, the athleticism that jumps off for you. Iowa, you got to have a tight end, got to have a offensive lineman every single draft from the University of Iowa. At number 15, another Indiana defensive back. We've got Lewis Moore, 210 tackles the last 3 years. Such a physical player in the back end that was also rangy in the nose for the football. 6 interceptions this past year, the second most in the country, and 4 career forced fumbles. So remember this. Indiana's talent composite. Up front, they had production with Stephen Daly and Kamara, and they were excellent. Tyreek Tucker, interior defenders. And so it gives you a little bit of a perspective here that guys like Lewis Moore, is this a player that could be a star at the next level? Like, where does this production come from? They played great teams like the Buckeyes and shut them down, or Miami and held them for much of that game, or Oregon, and they jumped their gun and played 2 games against the Ducks. 1 on the road at Autzen against Dan Lanning's Oregon team. So is Lewis Moore one of those players that goes probably day 3 or in the 3rd round? It could wind up being a lot of value for your team. We're going to have to stay tuned for that. Number 16, Skylar Gill-Howard was on a trajectory to be a first-round pick. Arguably the best player on Texas Tech's top 5 defense in the country before he got hurt. He had a pick 6 earlier in the year. In 3 years, totaled 15 tackles for loss, 16.5 sacks. Remember, defensive tackles don't have those crazy numbers of production the way edge defenders do because of all that space and that trash that they gotta work to. But this is a garbage man. He takes that out. He's willing to do it on every single snap and take on those double teams so that who does he free up? A Jacob Rodriguez right there behind him on those defenses. Thanks to him, he doesn't scare you the way I gotta rephrase that. His size, right? 6'1", 290 pounds. After seeing a player like Aaron Donald be what he was at that size, you're not as turned off by someone like Skylar Gill-Howard that's not a menacing DeForest Buckner 6'7", 310, or Eric Armstead 6'6", 300. Like some of these guys that are just absolute behemoths in the middle, you don't necessarily have to have that anymore. And he showed that he produced at the college level. We're going to go Jonah Coleman at 17 for Washington. He was a 3-year high-level producer, 1,800 yards and 25 touchdowns the last 2 years. And at Arizona, before that, 5 touchdowns rushing and 870 yards for the Wildcats in 2023, adds 800 yards receiving. So versatility for him. I made another video talking about a run on running backs. I think that's going to come in the 3rd round. A run on wide receivers that'll come in the 2nd round, and that's usually the way it rolls. I think Coleman could be one of those backs that gets up into that second round before that run on backs happens, because versatility, he produced at such a high level, and he can separate. He could be a home run hitter for somebody, and you love that blocking tenacity, as well as playing for Washington and being a standout for those Huskies. At number 18, Josiah Trotter, and he was one of those players that I was surprised at some of the things that I read about him in the sense of the draft process or the combine and athleticism. I think that his mold, 6'2", 237 pounds, after being 6'1.5", 235 pounds as a senior in high school, shows you he's filled in. He knows his body extremely well. He's got the confidence to move. He's not one of these guys that's a developmental piece that's going to have to continue to grow and going to take 2-3 years. He's used to playing at that weight. He's used to being that size. And so there's a confidence to a guy like that that's fit into his body and knows the way that he moves. And he's got those NFL bloodlines. His brother plays on the Eagles. His dad was a 2-time All-Pro with 900 tackles. And so Josiah Trotter out of Missouri, who played behind Chris McClellan, that's a common theme here that we're sort of showing here. So there's a couple linebackers like Rodriguez behind a Gil Howard, or this is Josiah Trotter behind a Chris McClellan, and that relationship between really good off-ball linebackers that were behind some really good interior defensive line players, and that relationship, and it's fun to go over that from that college game. At number 19, Nicholas Singleton. He's one of the most impressive young men that you can sort of follow. Missed 0 games in 4 years with Penn State. 3,500 yards and 45 touchdowns rushing, along with 1,000 yards receiving and 9 touchdowns. What's more impressive, even than those statistics that are gaudy, is that he did it while his teammate, his running back duo mate, we'll call it, Katron Allen, he also rushed for 4,000 yards. And this guy ran for 39 touchdowns and took 770 carries away from Nick Singleton over the last 4 years. So we're talking about a guy in Singleton that could have been someone that rushed for over 5,500 yards, and that was setting numerous records, but he split time with Katron Allen. I do believe instead of the records and sacrificing glory, you retain a sense of your body, right? You're a little bit healthier because you haven't been run into the ground and run into a nub the way you might have been if you had another season of carries under your belt, if you had another 300 carries that were given you with the football, and especially in that Big Ten physical conference. And so Nick Singleton, you might be asking, wait, why do you have him here instead of Katron Allen? Look, it's the receiving ability, and it is the home run hitter nature that Nick Singleton has and catches the football. If he's got space, that he can be gone. At number 20 on this list, by no means does this mean that he is the 20 best player amongst these guys that I'm talking about. Jalen Kilgore put on a show at the Combine, a 4.4 240, and he's got the best name in the draft. Jalen Kilgore. It's a pretty good name for a safety and a defensive back. Sounds like a thumper to me. And he was a teammate with Nick Emmanwori. You definitely know that name if you follow college football and the NFL now. Super Bowl champion for the Seattle Seahawks, runner-up to Defensive Player of the Year for a rookie. Long arms, 3-year starter, 180 tackles the last 3 seasons for South Carolina, 21 passes defended, 8 picks, and he had 10 specifically passes defended in 2025. Playing next to Emmanwori and watching those guys in 2024 for that Gamecocks defense was a scary sight, and he reminds you of him. 213 pounds. If you remember Emmanwori in the season that he had in 2024, wasn't quite as productive in my opinion as he was the season before. Flashed a little bit with the turnovers, but he's a player that's a day one, you plug and play. Kilgore, he is making your team not just better, but also more of a threat to the mental side of the game. If you have a wide receiver, a tight end, a running back that is going to bed the night before they play Jalen Kilgore, they might just be losing a little bit more sleep because he's going to be on the opposing sideline and they're going to run into him. And I think that might be as effective as any other trait that someone can possess. So he is a player to certainly look for to be taken day 2 of the NFL draft process. That is our list of 20 guys. So much fun to make this one. This was maybe one of my most favorites videos here to make in probably the last year because of this process. You know, it's very easy to talk about the best players, the Carnell Tates, the Caleb Downs, the Ruben Bain Jr.'s, Fernando Mendoza, but going to the deeper level and watching hundreds of these college football games and seeing how talented these guys are, and some of these guys are true superstars that there's only 32 players taken in the first round and so many talented players that a lot of these guys are going to wind up being very impactful for any team that they go on to play for. And so to come up with this list, and even 20, we could have gone as deep as 50 or more and still had a bit of trouble to make it. So a lot of guys that we left off. And so that's where it comes down to you. Let me know down below in the comments who I left off of this list that should have been here amongst the top 20 players that will not be in the first round. I know I missed a couple. There's going to wind up being some superstars that we didn't talk about in the mock draft process, in the process of this list, but winds up being some excellent football players in the NFL. So I appreciate you so much. Thank you for watching, and I will see all of you next time.
Best player in college football.
That Georgia and Ohio State game, New Year's Eve, is going to be a classic.
Josh Blunder, hi everybody, I'm Josh Blunder.
To the 40, 35, 30, Espinosa to the 20.